Next, we're going to talk about comparing text. So far we have taken a look at the text from First Minister's COVID-19 speeches in Scotland, and what we're going to do next is to compare these to the UK government speeches from 10 Downing Street, which are mostly done by Boris Johnson, but we're going to actually use all of the speeches available, especially because while he was ill when he had COVID and he was out of the office, then there were many other people giving the speeches as well, and it looks like the pattern there is that multiple people tend to give these speeches as opposed to mostly one person. So how do we compare them though? They're both going to be about COVID-19, and just cherry picking words to compare between the two speeches is not an easy task. So in this case, we look at some of the kind of established methods for looking at what is a document about and how do they compare to each other. The two concepts that we're going to make use of are term frequency and inverse term frequency. So far, we have taken a look at term frequencies and looked to see which words or which pairs of words are most common in the Scottish speeches. And when we did that, we also made note of things like stop words, because some of those stop words are basically going to come up at the very top of these term frequency sortings, but they're not of interest to us. Another way we might think about looking at what is a document about, especially if we're comparing two documents, in this case within a collection, so same type of documents, so two separate COVID-19 speeches in this case, is looking at what we call inverse document frequency and putting these two things together to create a measure called TF-IDF. So the inverse document frequency of any given term is basically looking at the ratio between the number of documents, so in this case it's going to be the number of speeches the particular word appears in, divided by the number of documents containing that term. It's the number of documents in total divided by the number of documents containing that term, and then we take the log of this. And basically calculating this between the two collections, so in this case UK and Scottish speeches, is going to tell us about which words exist in one more regularly but do not exist in the other. So it is not about which words are common within each of the documents, but more about which words are different between the two documents. So let's go to the code and take a look at that. So to compare these two, we have to again start by getting our data. So this time we're going to get our data from the UK government website. So we start by checking to see if we are actually able to scrape the data, and it looks like the answer is yes. And once we have this information, we can now basically go through the same process, get the URLs, write a function that scrapes the data, and then saves everything to a data frame. And at the end, we're going to save our scraped data as COVID Speeches UK. So I'm not going to run through this here, but the code for it is available in the repository if you're interested in it. And another thing that we're going to do is go through the same data prep steps for the UK data as well, where we do things like figure out the day on which this speech happened, count the number of words, and also do the tokenization for words and then also for biograms, again applying that correction for various ways the word COVID-19 shows up. And ultimately we save these three data sets that we get from the UK for the speeches, where each row is a speech or text, the biograms, where each row is pairs of words, and the words, where each row is a word from the speech. So let's go ahead and take a look at the visualization. I'm not going to run through the whole thing again, but let's go ahead and knit this document to see what things look like for the UK speeches. So this is the same analysis we did for the Scottish speeches in the previous video, except our source data this time is UK. So we're not yet doing the comparison, but there is one comparative step that I wanted to show to you before we bring these two pieces of data together for the document frequency calculation. Okay, so one of the things we can see is that there were only 55 speeches from the UK government as opposed to the 157 from the Scottish government. So there is an imbalance in the number of speeches. And then if we actually take a look at the distribution of the words, they seem to be shorter on average as well. We were seeing a peak around 2,000 for Scotland. And not really going up over time. I think it seems like there's a big gap in the speeches that are delivered between July and maybe September, and that's probably accounting for that huge difference in the number. And it seems like perhaps there weren't those daily speeches happening at the time, or at least they're not published on the government website where everything else is published. If we take a look at the top words, we're seeing kind of similar things. People is the most common again, and then virus. So that seems somewhat similar. And then if we take a look at the sentiment analysis, we're again seeing things like support, protect, safe in the positive side, and virus and risk on the negative side. So those are actually looking pretty similar as well. These are the daily sentiments and for the other sentiments as well. So I'll let you scroll through these if you feel like it. Let's take a look at the bigrams real quick. Social distancing appears a lot. So that's what actually tipped me to think about, are they saying social or positive distancing? And so I made that same plot for the UK text as well. And it looks like in the UK government speeches, it's been social distancing all along. So there wasn't a switch over to emphasizing physical distancing over social distancing. Now, you know, to acknowledge these both kind of effectively are talking about the same thing, about leaving room between you and the next person and not gathering in large crowds. So both in terms of keeping distance and also keeping away from large crowds. But the vernacular, it seems like, has not changed over time in the UK government speeches as it has on the Scottish government speeches. All right. The next thing we might want to do is actually bring these data together. So what I'm going to do in the next step is combine the two data sets. So we have data that are very similar to each other, and we are going to combine the two. So let's go ahead and load these two data sets. And I'm going to work with the word data right now as opposed to the full speech data. So I'm loading the Scottish words data. And then I'm going to go ahead and load the UK words data. And then once I do that, I'm going to add a new column to each one of these that actually keeps track of the origin. So whether it's coming from Scotland or UK, so that when I, in the next step, bind my data together, we have this identifier column for where the speech came from. Also, the Scottish speeches had words had 12 variables and the UK words had 10 variables. So in the Scotland data scraping step, I also had grabbed location and the speaker as well. Those don't exist in the other data set, so I'm going to get rid of them since that's not going to be part of our analysis. And then we're going to bind our data using the bind rows function now that they have the same variables in it. And we end up with a data set of a total of 390,885 words. Some of these are, so if we were to do a quick count on that origin variable that we just created, many of them are going to be from Scotland since there were more speeches and longer as well, and the remainder are from the UK. So then we save that data set, and then in our next step, we're going to calculate that TF-IDF. So we're basically going to, let's go ahead and load everything here. I'm going to keep track of both of my colors, blue and red for Scotland and UK, so that we can use those in our visualizations. And we can start with some basic comparisons first. So here I'm grouping by origin and taking a look at comparing the number of speeches, the number of words, and also the average number of words. So we can see that more speeches and hence more words and more on average longer speeches from the Scottish government than the UK government on these. And then we can take a look at what we have here. Oh, the two densities basically together, so overlaid on each other, just in case we want to take a look at the distributions as well. We knew that their peaks were different, but in the UK one, we're seeing this bimodal distribution. There's another peak here, maybe maybe it's a speaker difference. I'm not sure, maybe some speakers speak more than others. So that might be, if we had a way of recording who was giving the speech, that could help us figure that out. But right now it's just I'm kind of hypothesizing, and the distribution for Scotland. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is this TF-IDF measure that we talked about. And basically for that, we are going to use the bind TF-IDF function from the tidy text package. So as I said, the nice thing about this package is it allows you to do the things that are very commonly used tasks in text analysis, and do them in a way that you can tag them onto a pipeline. So we have basically, we're saying for the speeches, we're going to count for each one of the countries which the number of times particular words appear. And this is without the stop words being removed, since they'll probably show up in both of them. So they won't show up when we look at the differences. And then we want to group the data by origin, and then take a look to see kind of the total number of times particular words occur in the or total number of documents that that particular word occurs in. So something like the word "the" probably occurs in every single document. And then we finally calculate that term frequency, inverse document frequency. And so let's take a look at that. And we might just take a look at quickly on the top of this. So here are some of the words that are common in one and not the other. In the UK, we're seeing the word slide. Guess why? They use slides for their presentation. So they often say things like, "as you can see on the slide," or "next slide, please." And that's why there's a difference. In Scotland, we talk about Aberdeen a lot, and looks like that doesn't really make the UK daily, or the, not daily, but the COVID briefings from the UK government. Another one is the word defeat. So this is interesting. So let's go ahead and visualize these. So it's the same information that we're looking at, but we're going to take a look at it in a visual way. So here are the words in blue that are appearing regularly in the speeches by the First Minister in Scotland, but not as regularly or as in high frequency in the UK speeches, and then vice versa for the red ones in the UK. So slide and Aberdeen, I think, makes sense. But if we take a look at Scotland, and if you actually watch these almost daily briefings by Nicola Sturgeon, she always says things like, "and by that measurement," because she's always qualifying the numbers that she gives with, however the numbers were counted, since there are many different ways. We've learned over the course of this pandemic that we can count things like positive cases or the number of deaths and whatnot. So she's always saying that. We're seeing some locations like Lothian and Ayrshire and Lanarkshire, which makes sense that they don't occur in the UK side. But another one that's interesting to me on the UK side is this word defeat. So we can take a look to see where this word defeat occurs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at so we have the COVID speeches, UK words, and then let's say filter for word equals defeat. And so we're seeing it happen 30 times. And then if we were to do that for the Scotland one, none whatsoever. So the word defeat is interestingly used in the UK speeches a lot, but not in the Scotland. So let's take a look in context as to where this occurs. It looks like one of them is speech number 6. So what I'm going to do is this time I'm going to look at the actual speeches. And let's say speech, that should say filter, speech no equals 6. And then if I was to pull the text, and I wonder if I can view this. No, that's not going to be really useful to do it in the data viewer. So let's go ahead and actually put this here. It's a really, really long speech, but we are going to try to figure out where does the word defeat occur here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Let's take a look to see if I can paste it somewhere else. So that we can look for the word defeat in it. Okay, so it's like, I believe that these technical developments taken together will enable us to defeat this virus by the spring, as humanity has defeated every other infectious disease. So this word defeat appears in places like this in the UK speeches, but it does not occur in the Scotland speeches, because if you have been listening to the speeches by the First Minister, they actually tend to be quite factual and basically communicate the numbers and the rules around them. And there is lots of encouraging talk there as well, but clearly in a slightly different way. Other things we can see are things like there was lots of talk of ventilators in the UK and not as much in Scotland, it seems like. So that's another one that you might see show up. The word transcript, my guess is they say you can find the transcript here or there, which is not something they say in the Scottish speeches either. But it's interesting to take a look at this to see how these documents kind of compare to each other. And so one way of doing this comparison is using this TF-IDF measure. There are other ways as well, but that's one way of something that starts to tell us maybe there are differences between these documents, and perhaps we can start thinking about, could we build a predictive model that where if we give it a sentence, it can predict for us whether it might come from the UK or the Scottish. So that's what we're going to work on by the end of the week.